Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Welcome to a new episode of Canadian Investing in the U.S. With Glenn Sutherland. This week, my guest is Araceli Hernandez. Araceli, let's start off by giving everyone a bit of an intro to yourself, a little bit who you are, and maybe a little bit of your story, how it went.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And yes, I am Canadian, and I have been investing. I've been an investor for over 10 years now, and I started investing in Canada. I actually bought a property in Hamilton that I converted into a triplex. And that was in 2014, which things were not so bad. And Hamilton was kind of flat, if you're familiar with Ontario and Hamilton. So there was not really a lot of appreciation in the city, but that was at that time the only thing that I could afford. And I said, I'm going to do that. And after my divorce, I wanted to have some income. So I wanted to get, set up a rental. And I did. I went through a lot of trouble with contractors, things like that probably a lot of investors can relate to. But I finished it in 2016. And I said, okay, something kind of clicked. And I said, this works. Like, I really like what is happening here, that I can have some money coming in. And it actually worked better. My first idea was just to have a little bit of income to offset my mortgage. But it actually, when it's finished and I got renters, I was covering everything. Not only the mortgage, but all the utilities, property taxes, everything. And I had a little bit of money in my pocket. So I really, really liked it. But when I tried to do this again in 2016, nothing works. Nothing, the numbers that I had buying the same type of property, it just wouldn't work anymore. So I said, okay, so what do I do? So I started to go like this, right? Like looking farther and farther away. I went to St. Catharines, and even I looked in Windsor's, Sudbury, lots and lots of towns in Canada. And everything would not make sense anymore, right? And I said, well, what do I do? And I just went to a meeting, and somebody told me, it says, have you ever thought about investing in the US? And I said, well, I don't know anything about the US. And so long story short, he sold me 2 properties, and the properties were in Cleveland, Ohio. And I just couldn't believe the prices at the time. I bought my first property for $17,000.
Nice.
For $22,000, and they were single family homes. And I'm saying, what am I buying, right? So anyway, so the area was good, but the property manager wasn't. So I had to leave that, and I decided to stay. So that is kind of like a long-winded story, but that's how I got started in the US.
No, that's really cool. I could have a million questions from this, but even just what just popped in my head right now is you said that the property manager wasn't good. What about them wasn't good? The most common thing I always hear is communication, but sometimes it's other things altogether. Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that I've created a new coaching program. I believe the new coaching program has way more value than any of the programs that have even existed in the past. What we've done is pre-recorded all the lessons so that you can work through it at your own pace, which is pretty cool. And then we're going to meet up on a regular basis to answer the questions, do deal analysis, and actually spend our time together working on things instead of spending our time learning things. I think this will make a seamless transition to buying in the United States and will help you solve a lot of your problems. If this is of interest to you, go to glennsutherland.com/coaching. I hope to help you guys invest in the United States, and I hope we provide as much value as possible. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, so a little bit of communication. Sometimes I couldn't get a hold of him, but the biggest thing is that he was lying to me.
Oh my goodness.
He was asking me for money to fix the property. And because it's not that far away, I just got in the car and went there because he said, oh, things are fixed. And I called him from the property and I said, you said that this was fixed. And he said, yes, it's fixed. And I says, well, how funny it is because I am here at the property and it's not fixed. At that time, I decided that I was going to fire him, which I did, right?
Yeah.
But one of the properties, because of the negligence that he had, the tenant uh, kind of did something bad to the property. Then during the winter time, he didn't turn off the water. There was a flood. There was a ton of damage in the property, which it was unacceptable.
No kidding.
So that's what I said, that the property manager was not good. And I think this is one of the very important points here, that you need to have a good team of people, that they are really going to look after your property. Just vet them as much as possible. I thought that I had, but it just didn't turn out well. So when I got rid of him, then you are in a city that you don't know of many people, and now you have this. Okay, so what am I gonna do, right? So
Yeah. No, so, okay. So maybe I'll just probe into some questions on this. So you had to hire a second property manager. Um, is there anything that you did differently between the first property and second property manager, to try to make
yes,
sure that didn't happen again?
yeah, for sure. So what I did is, actually, I did not hire anybody right away, because now I was scared, right? Like,
Right.
what are they gonna do? So what I decided at that point is that I was going to sell the second property that I kept.
Okay.
And I went and talked to the tenant, and I said to her, okay, so what is the problem? I'm not dealing with this property manager anymore. What is it that, is the problem with you? And especially because she was a good tenant, but she was always paying a little late, right? And I'm
Right.
going like, I kind of want to get away from this. Um, so she said, no, I really like the area. I don't want to move. And I said, well, would you be open to buy the property? And she said, yeah, absolutely. And what we did is, I fixed a couple of things, which they were major, the furnace and some of the electrical. And I said, listen, the house is in good condition, livable conditions. There's some cosmetic things that you need to do. But if you're open to buy it, why don't we do a lease to own contract, so I don't have to have the property management in place?
Huh.
And she agreed. So I got a consideration and increased the rent. And that property was fantastic for 3 years, right up until COVID. In COVID, she decided to just take off. It says, I'm moving to Buffalo. And I'm going like, okay, like, what's going on? Like, where are you buying the property? It says, no, I'm moving in 2 weeks. And she left. She didn't leave me an address, nothing.
Okay. I have a million questions here.
Yeah,
So,
for
okay.
sure.
First of all, so I've tried this and not been, I'm not going to say I'm not successful, but I found
Yeah,
it's very difficult to convert a tenant into like a lease option
yeah,
into, because a lot of times they're already in the building, and then you're like, ask for an option consideration where you're like, hey, can you put a deposit down on this? And it's like mentally for them, and sometimes you're asking to change the rent even at that point to turn it into
yeah,
a lease option. Um, and it just goes in their mind. They're like, why would I pay more rent every month and pay to actually have a consideration on this property, right?
yeah.
When I'm already living in the property. I'm curious how that conversation went, and like, and how you got them to agree to even to do that, because
Yeah.
usually I have to set up the lease option right before they move in. So I'm really interested in this.
Yeah, well, what I said to her is just, listen, I'm going to be selling the property because I don't have somebody to look after it. And because I live far away, I cannot just come here if something happens. So I said, I don't know when I sell it if they're going to let you stay here or they're going to ask you to move. Most likely, they're going to ask you to move. And she said, no, 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 I don't want to move. And that's when I told her, says, listen, well, there's another option. If you are open to buy the property, if you want to stay here, and I'll make it very accessible. And because I asked her to pay more money, I said, that money is going to come back to you when you're ready to close on the property. And I gave her an option to 2 to 5 years, because I know,
Yeah.
that was lower income. So I said, you have 2 to 5 years to close on the property. And I gave her a schedule of what the property would be priced at in every year. So the longer you wait, obviously, it's going to be a little bit more, but it was already a fixed price.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I think this is okay with me, because I
Okay.
don't want to move. And I think that was kind of like the selling point in this particular case, that she didn't want to move. And I said, listen, if the person that is buying the property want the house vacant, then you're going to have to move. And she definitely did not want to move. And it looked to her that it was a good idea to own the property. But at the end of the day, she didn't. She just took off 3 years later, and it was okay.
It happens. That stuff happens all the time. I do a lot of lease options, so I'm familiar with them just running away. So when you're changing them from a tenant to a lease option, so still a tenant, did they get any rent credits like every month, or was it just that deposit they put down at the start that would be a credit towards closing the property at the end?
That's correct. So they get the deposit, which is the option consideration, is to buy.
Yeah.
And then the rent increase. So they had the regular rent plus another chunk of money that they paid every month. And that chunk of money would go towards their down payment at the end. So it was like a little bit of forced savings for them in order to get ready to buy the property. So.
Okay. And then for the sale price, I know you talked about what you bought it for. I don't know if you had to do any renovations to it, but like what did you don't, if this is too personal, you don't have to say, but like okay. How much different from the purchase price to the price that the tenant would purchase was there? I have more free content. So if you're interested, I created a PDF guide and a video to go along with the PDF guide to complement it. And what the guide is all about is the 5 most common mistakes that Canadians make when investing in the United States. So if you're interested in this free guide, go to CanadianInvestingInTheUSA.com/mistakes. And let's go back to the podcast. And it's free.
Okay, so the property, I bought it for $20,000.
Yeah.
And then I added another $20,000. I have to change the furnace, some of the electrical, and a little bit of the cosmetics, nothing too much. Yeah. But I put another $20,000. So the total was that in my investment was $40,000.
Okay. And
after that, then the sale price, I think I set it up at around $36,000, and it was 3 to 4% increase every time that she just like, if she didn't want to close this year, then the following year the price would be 3% more, and so on, right? So It was just kind of like a breaking point for me.
Yep.
But I had that property for 3 years rented as a rent to own, and half a year as just a pure rental. So that property generated double of what I bought it for in rents alone, right?
That's awesome.
So that's why I didn't want to get rid of it, even though I was going to sell it for less than what I put into. The offset of the rents that I had over those 3 years really paid for everything and more on profit in that property. So.
Okay. And I've heard about different people doing this differently because, typically when you're doing like a lease to own, right? You're going to have the 2 or a lease option. You're going to have 2 different contracts, right? One for the tenancy contract and one for the lease to own, right? In that additional, so I don't know the numbers, but say, the additional rent that they were putting in, did that go on to their rental agreement or did you put that onto the lease option agreement?
The lease option. It goes into the lease option because that is what they're going to be using to purchase the property at the end, right? The rent would be just a pure rent, and the extra money was going to go towards their lease option agreement, which depending on how many months they paid, then that's what would be kind of discounted in the end, basically.
That's smart. But that's smart because like some people they just redo the lease their tenancy agreement and then no I know so I was making sure because then if they have to you do an eviction or you have to do any sort of credits, it's all based on that other number, right? And there might be returns based on that number, and where you want to put it into the side on the other side, the lease option contract where it's all non-refundable, right? So it's based on closing credits. So this person leaves, they're gone. Did you have to do an eviction? I don't know what's different from county to county. Do you have to do an eviction to take control of that property, or did you just put somebody in?
No, like, I call her, and because she was a little late on her rent, and And she said, well, I lost my job and I'm going to move out. And I said, okay, do you want me to chat with you, see what if there's anything that we can come up with? I was even willing to give her some money back.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I'm moving out in 2 weeks. So I went back to the property. The property was empty. So I
Yeah.
don't really have to do anything, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, I know. Just the reason I bring
it's,
it up, I had some in that we were doing in Dayton and Toledo, and I know
yeah,
in Montgomery County in
yeah,
Dayton, what we would do is we do like a quick eviction on it because it was already a
yeah,
vacant property. Because my concern was that I was just worried that at some point they might come back and ask for their option consideration or the rent
yeah.
credits or any of that stuff. But it all
I
is county to county how it
Yeah,
goes.
I asked for her information, but she never responded back. So I have no way to
She doesn't.
get
Yeah,
back to
she
her.
seems
So
like she doesn't want it.
yeah, I said, okay, well, and I waited and okay.
So what kind of condition did they leave it in? Did you have to do a re-renovation or just a quick cleaning, or what situation were they leaving in?
A quick cleaning, really, there was nothing. They actually had fixed a couple of things that needed to be fixed, the wall and everything. They
Yeah.
did some painting. I had already did most of the major changes. Um, Basically, I just had to clean it up in order for me to put it back on the market, and that's it. So I was lucky, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. I think I was with this property.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, I don't think that all tenants are bad. It's just those 2% of tenants that will create a whole bunch of issues, right? So
Oh yeah. No, I totally agree too. Tenants are what makes this business work, right? So
exactly, exactly. And remember, like everybody needs a place to live.
yeah.
And if the majority of people, I would say probably 75 to 80% of people, they're not gonna be ready to buy. So obviously they have to rent somewhere, right? So that's why we're needed, right? That's what investors are here for,
Oh yeah.
to provide that service.
And so we're talking about a few years ago. So, fast forwarding to today's date, are do you still own these properties? Do you use property manager? Are you self-managing still, or how does this all look these days?
Okay, so that property I sold it through COVID because, as you know, like Canadians weren't able to cross the border for a
Right.
couple of years. But at that time, while I was having this renter, I was pretty much going to leave the area because I said I can't find anybody. I was still working full time at the time, and I said, I don't have a lot of time to go there. But then, as the universe has it, a friend of mine called me that I haven't talked to in years, right? And like for some reason, we just didn't talk. And the minute that I said, I'm just going to go to my holiday, come back, I'm going to sell the property, he calls me and he said, oh, it says, I remember that we talked about going into real estate. Did you ever do anything? And I said, well, yeah, I did. I bought my property in Hamilton, and then I bought two properties in Cleveland. And he said, well, I got a property in Detroit. And so the long story short is we created a partnership
Ah,
and we started to buy properties in Cleveland at auction. And we completed over 10 properties, like flipping houses,
yeah.
right? Um, and we bought them, the majority of them at auction. In 2019, we had three houses left. So one of them was kind of halfway through. The other one it wasn't even started. We just got the deed on that one. And the last one, we bought it as a multifamily to keep as a future rental. Well, the border closed. The good thing is that we already had all our team in place, so we could finish the property, the two properties that were not fixed. And we were a little bit afraid that because of the pandemic, and you know how the US property sometimes they drop 50% of the value. And we were really afraid. I said, oh, this is going to be bad. Like, we're going to probably lose money on these properties. But it was the complete opposite. Like the
Oh
property
yeah, everything
sold.
kind of like
So,
took off, yeah, during the
yeah,
COVID.
the property sold so quickly. Like within a week, we had an offer and for over asking in the second property and the first one as well. And it's just, okay, well, this is great. And then we just kept the property, the multifamily, uh, there until the end of 2022, when we were able to go back to
Yeah.
there.
So you mentioned you came from an auction. Is this a tax deed auction then?
Mm-hmm. Foreclosure and tax. Yeah.
Okay. So you get the deed right away in Ohio, I believe, right? You don't have to wait,
Usually, at that time, it was 4 to 6 weeks.
well, that's
Now,
nothing.
because yeah, that's not, exactly, that's nothing, because there is a 30-day
Redemption period?
redemption period. Thank you. So for us, six weeks was perfect, and then you can just go and redo the property. And at that time, there was a ton of inventory.
Yeah.
And in 2019, we just saw a total drop of inventory, very little. And then all of those properties were really in bad condition. So you needed to have a ton of money to put in to rehabilitate it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where I was going with this, that to tell you what the auction is.
Yeah.
But
How does the auction
now,
work? Is it
yeah,
an online
so
auction or do you have to go there?
no, that was an in-person auction.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic because you could actually see who was bidding. And my point was that after the pandemic, when the auctions were forced to move into an online version, which now they are online, they left it online.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder because now there's a ton of more people bidding. The
Yeah.
inventory is low,
Everywhere.
and they're bidding high prices. Plus, the banks are also bidding, which is it wasn't there before. And now the biggest thing is that now it takes 4 to 5 months to get the deed. So it is a lot harder to get. You can still get good properties if you're willing to wait.
Yeah, but still, even, say you're putting your money in, and then really, do you really want to start the renovation for those 4 or 5 months?
Or
'Cause they
I
could
wouldn't.
redeem.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Yes, I wouldn't. So you want to make sure that you have the deed in your hand before you can actually do something, because it has happened that you do renovations, you kind of want to get started, and then the person redeems the property, and now you cannot say, oh well, I put $20,000 in the property, can you give it back? No, it can't be like that. So
Yeah.
you can't do that. So that's why it's just a little bit harder. It's just a period that you need to wait in order to get the deeds.
Yeah, like with all of it, it just has to be a number in your spreadsheet. If there's holding cost on that money, it's, a lot of these things can work. You just have to plan for it, right? Just
Exactly.
part of the
If
business
you're
plan.
able to buy it at a good discount, it might be worth it if you have the capital to put aside and just wait, right? Because normally you would have to pay for the property within 7 days for the full price, whatever your bid is. So your money is going to be tied up until you get the deed
Right.
for a few months. So
If they do redeem it, I assume that there is an interest that has to be paid on that money for the certain period of time.
interest to who?
To you, like, so say you bought the tax deed or the foreclosure, and then someone redeems in that period. I assume you're going to get compensated. I think it's usually a different rate for everyone else. I don't know if you know that
Um,
offhand, but
I had it happen twice and we did not get any money, like,
they just
because it
redeemed
was it was
flat.
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So one property that I bought, the same, it was in a really good area, really good price. And I think that people knew about it. So we won the bid. And within, I think 10 days, they called and said the property's been redeemed. Come and pick up your check. And they just gave us exactly the same amount. So there was no interest on it. And I
Yeah.
think because it's such a short period of time, like it's
Could be
30
that.
days, that they will not give it to you. So I think other states that have longer redeem period, if
Yeah.
it's 6 months or a year, they probably will give you some kind of interest.
Okay.
But I don't think they'll do it at least in Ohio and in that area. So
Awesome. If anyone was interested in doing any of these different strategies, lease options or tax deed options or anything else, do you have any tips that you'd suggest that they know before they went ahead and did this?
okay, well, that is a really good question, because a lot of people think that they go into the States, it's, you buy cheap properties, and you could buy cheap properties, but cheap properties is not the same that a good deal property, right?
Yeah.
You probably know that. There's so many areas, and this is kind of like the difference between Canada and the US, that sometimes going from 2 streets over, it's completely different ARB, or the after repair value. And if you are comparing it, even though they're close by, you might not have that value. So if you're going to be looking at investing anywhere in the US, because the US is so big, I would recommend that you pick a county and that you get familiar with the areas in that county, because even from county to county, I do buy only in the Cuyahoga County in Cleveland, and there's many cities, right? So you have Cleveland Heights, you have Euclid, and you have Cleveland and Parma and so on. And each one of those cities have a little bit of a change. Even when you need permits, some of them have POS, which is a point of sale inspection. So I would recommend that you get familiar with the areas that you're going to be investing in before you do anything at all. And that's what I do with my coaching clients, that, show them where they need to invest for the strategy that they're selecting. If you're doing flips, you're going to completely buy in a separate area. If you're doing rentals, there's other areas that are much better. Like, your buck would go faster and farther than if you buy in other areas. So, and rents also. There's so many things that you need to consider. It is easier, in my opinion. I don't know how you find it, Glenn, to buy in the US. I find it a lot easier than in Canada, because of the transparency that you have in data.
Oh, it's night and day for data. Like, just to see what they bought it for, what their mortgage is registered on it, where they live, where the business is registered, and where the property is registered. Just like just having so much information, unless you're a mortgage broker and have a purview access in Canada, you don't have that access.
Exactly. So it makes it a lot harder for people investing in Canada to make the proper educated decision to buy that property or not, which I find it is so interesting, because now you don't even have to have a license, either as a mortgage broker or as a realtor, in order to have access to this information. And when you are buying, you're going to be looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of properties before you find the one that is going to make some money for you. So if you're going to be paying, because you can pay somebody, you can pay an agent here in Canada to get you that information.
Yeah.
But it gets pretty expensive when you are analyzing 30, 40 properties. Plus it's the time as well, right? Like, I can do it within now 15 minutes, get all the data that I need to decide if I want to continue or maybe put an offer on that house or not, right?
Yep. No, totally agree. Araceli, if people are wanted to get a hold of you, how do they track you down?
Okay, so there's a couple ways, but the best way is to just go to my website. It's aracelihernandez.com.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. I think that there's a lot of value in talking about the lease options and the tax deed auctions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will be excited to listen to this one. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope there is, some value to your audience.
Awesome. Thanks.
That was a nice video. Bye.